She dropped the wine glass like it slipped, but I knew better. The pause afterward was too long, too still. Her hands didn't move to clean. She waited. The sound had barely finished echoing off the kitchen tile when she tilted her head like a director checking if the actor hit his mark. "Say something," she said, standing by the counter like she was owed a reaction. I crouched without a word, brushing ceramic shards into my palm, careful not to flinch when the sharp edge grazed my palm. I felt the sting, but I welcomed it. It was the first honest sensation in weeks. Her voice came again, laced with artificial confusion like this wasn't a performance. "You don't even argue anymore." I stood slowly. Let the silence stretch. Let her fidget with her phone like it might offer her a better version of this moment. "That's how you know I'm done," I said. Then I turned and walked past her. That was the night I stopped giving her what she wanted, and I knew on some level she noticed. Because the next morning she brought me coffee with an apology in her eyes and a smirk tugging at the corners of her mouth. A strange mix. One for the stage, the other for the script she thought I hadn't seen. For months before that she'd been angling, not screaming or storming out, no. She preferred subtler cuts. I'd talk about a project I was excited about, she'd yawn. I'd mention a book I enjoyed, she'd say it sounded cute. When I planned something thoughtful, she'd find a reason to call it performative. And when I pushed back even gently, she'd tilt her head and whisper things like, "Wow, are you hearing how aggressive you sound right now?" Other times, when I said nothing, she'd mutter, "Right, because this marriage is a museum exhibit now, all silence and dust." It was always a game I wasn't allowed to win. Defend myself, I was volatile. Say nothing, I was cold. The options were erosion or guilt. And either way, she got to claim the high ground. At first, I thought it was stress. Her job, the house, whatever. I told myself it would pass, that we'd had rough stretches before and come through stronger. I even told a friend I thought we were evolving, maturing. But that was before I stopped reacting and she started testing for silence like she was waiting for a lab result. The night of the broken glass wasn't dramatic. That's what made it stick. It was controlled, deliberate, and final. Not a fight. A signal. I knew what she wanted: to provoke, to record, to twist the story into something she could point to later. But I'd already started pulling away from that script. Not because I was too tired to argue, but because I finally saw the shape of the trap. I wouldn't play my part anymore. She didn't understand that yet, but she would. And when she finally did, she wouldn't be able to revise the ending. It crept in slowly, her erosion campaign. Not with shouting or slammed doors, but with sighs, tilted heads, and the kind of dismissive glances that pass in silence but cut just as deep. Paper cuts don't leave marks, but they linger longer. She'd start small. I'd mention a trip idea, just a weekend drive up the coast, nothing expensive, and she'd blink like I was speaking another language. "That sounds sweet," she'd murmur, with a look that meant anything but. When I brought up a podcast I liked, she rolled her eyes and said, "So it's just a guy talking. Why do men love that?" Once I tried to show her something I'd written for a work pitch. She smiled without reading it and said, "I'm glad you have a thing." Every interaction became a subtle provocation, an invitation to defend myself. But I didn't take the bait, not at first, not until the little things started scraping at my confidence. I caught myself hesitating before speaking, rehearsing benign sentences like they were trial testimony. And when I finally pushed back, when I asked her, calmly, privately, why everything I said seemed to land wrong, she stepped back like I'd shoved her. "See, this, you're always ready to escalate." Always, that word did something. It rewrote the timeline, made my reactions retroactive evidence of a version of me that didn't exist. I wasn't angry, not then. I was stunned. Because suddenly I wasn't in a conversation, I was in a performance review for a job I didn't know I'd been failing. So I tried another tactic: distance. Not to punish her, but to protect myself. I let her win the silences. Let her lead the conversations into dead ends. I started watching instead of speaking. And I started remembering. Every sigh, every smirk, every just joking jab cataloged, not contested. She noticed the shift. Of course she did. But instead of softening, she studied it, me. She started asking questions that sounded like concern but landed like surveillance. "You've been quiet lately. Are you feeling okay? Is something going on with work?" I knew the performance was for something, but I didn't know what yet, not fully. I still had the instinct to salvage, to fix. That impulse hadn't disappeared, just dulled. Hope is stubborn that way. But then, one evening, she left her phone in the bathroom while I brushed my teeth. It was on a call, still connected. The screen dimmed, but the speaker was on. I wasn't snooping, I hadn't touched it, I just heard voices, her voice clear and sharp. "He's so quiet now, it'll be easier to frame the exit." The voice on the other end laughed, a friend I vaguely recognized. "Get some tears on paper, say he's emotionally cold, no one checks that." And then came the part that changed everything. She laughed. So did I once. Quietly. A laugh without humor, without sound. I walked out of that bathroom and stared at the woman on the couch, legs curled, scrolling aimlessly. She looked up and smiled like nothing had shifted, but something had. That laugh she gave, it was the sound of the ground moving beneath us, and I wasn't going to slip. After that night, everything clicked into place like furniture in a staged apartment. Her indifference, her prodding, the sudden turn toward manufactured vulnerability, it wasn't aimless. It was architecture. She was designing an exit. Not a clean one, a crafted one. The phone call had confirmed it. She wasn't just preparing to leave, she was preparing a version of the truth to carry with her. So I began preparing too. The first thing I did was nothing. No change in tone, no sudden distance. I didn't withdraw, I refined. I made quiet notes. I timed her calls when she thought I wasn't listening. I watched who started texting more often. I noted which friends began using phrases that sounded oddly rehearsed. "Are you feeling heard? Do you feel seen in this relationship?" I didn't confront anyone. I just filed it all away. That was the week her lawyer friend Lena started dropping by more often. She'd always been around: dinners, birthdays, wine nights. But now it was coffee on a Tuesday or just passing through on a Sunday morning. Too frequent, too casual. I walked past the guest room one afternoon and saw her reorganizing the bookshelf. New linens were already folded on the bed. I leaned against the doorway, watching her line up notebooks and highlighters on the nightstand like it was an exam prep center. "Expecting someone?" I asked casually. She didn't look up. "Just want a space to think. Sometimes it's hard with you pacing all night." That was new. I hadn't paced in weeks, but I nodded. Later, while vacuuming, she left her bag open on the counter, not carelessly, intentionally, like bait. I saw 3 folders inside, neatly labeled. Narrative. Timeline. Custody thoughts. No dates, no signatures, just potential storylines waiting for a casting call. I didn't touch anything, didn't ask. I pulled out my phone and took a time-stamped photo. Then I returned the vacuum to the hall closet and asked what she wanted for dinner. She shrugged. "I'm not that hungry, maybe soup." Soup. The first time she'd made me soup was the week I got promoted. She'd worn one of my shirts and joked about being my soft landing. Back then, it felt real. Like something built together. Now it was something else, something scripted. She de-learned to weaponize softness. I took out my old laptop that night, the one with no shared accounts, no synced drives. I set up a document labeled Day 1, even though it was. It was more like Day 274, but it felt like a beginning, the start of my version. While she staged a story, I built a record. And the difference between us, she was preparing for a play, I was preparing for court. The thing that broke me wasn't the folders. It wasn't even the phone call. It was the discovery that she'd written the breakup before I'd even withdrawn. I found the drafts by accident. Or maybe I was meant to. She left her laptop open, half closed over a steaming mug of tea, no coaster, of course, because everything she touched lately had an undercurrent of casual destruction. I wasn't looking to pry. I was walking past. Then I saw the file name in the corner of the screen. Reflection statement docx. The name was innocuous, almost innocent, but the first sentence wasn't. "It's been difficult watching him shut down, but I've stayed patient as long as I could." She wrote that in April. I stopped reaching out in June. Her whole performance, the sighs, the jabs, the quiet accusations, hadn't been a response to distance. It had been choreography. She needed me silent so she could call it abandonment. She needed me quiet so she could claim the role of the survivor. The rest of the document read like a pre-memoir, a one-sided recounting of imagined slights and exaggerated pauses. Phrases like emotional starvation and unchecked absence popped up like they were lifted from a counseling brochure. I didn't take a screenshot. I didn't email it to myself. I simply read it, absorbed it, and walked away. I didn't want her knowing I'd seen it. Not yet. If this was the game she wanted to play, then I'd let her think the stage was hers, for now. I took a long walk that night, not to clear my head, I didn't believe in that anymore, but to think tactically. I had options, I had rights, I had my own story too. By the end of the week I had a family attorney on retainer, quiet, discreet, someone who specialized in narrative protection, my term, not hers. She preferred documentation strategy, same thing. I moved some assets. Not everything, just the ones she didn't know were tied to a trust formed before our marriage. I opened a private bank account and directed a portion of my consulting payments there. Legal, clean, quiet. At home I played the role she wrote for me. Quiet, withdrawn, occasionally distracted. She'd glance over from her laptop with mock concern and ask if I was sleeping okay. I'd nod, smile slightly, and go back to whatever I wasn't really doing. What she didn't see was the quiet alignment behind my silence. Call logs, folder timestamps, property spreadsheets. Every step I took left a trail one she couldn't edit. The turning point came when she texted me from the next room. "I think we should talk soon about us." I didn't reply because she'd already written that conversation, and I'd already prepared the ending. She waited a full week before trying again. More warmth in her tone, more softness in her body language. She touched my arm when handing me a glass of water, lingered in doorways, asked if I wanted to watch one of the old shows we used to fall asleep to. I said yes. I let her rest her head on my shoulder while the opening credits rolled. Her breath slowed like she was settling into something safe. But I didn't watch the show. I watched the way she smiled at the screen, knowing full well it was part of her timing. It didn't matter. I already had everything I needed. I'd met with my attorney 3 times by then. We'd gone over every scenario, every possible pivot she might make once I refused the role of checked-out husband. The truth was simple and devastating. She wasn't leaving me. She was preparing to blame me for the departure she'd already decided on. But she wouldn't get the last word. The confrontation came on a Thursday morning. She walked into the kitchen with her phone in her hand like it was evidence or leverage. Hair tied back. No makeup. Comfortable clothes but carefully chosen. The kind of outfit that says, "I'm not here to fight, I'm here to be honest." She slid her phone onto the counter and said, "I think we should talk about separating." I didn't flinch. I didn't ask why or say I was surprised. Instead, I pulled an envelope from the drawer by the fridge and handed it to her. A white standard-sized document sleeve, sealed, labeled only with her name. She blinked. "What's this?" I gestured to the table. "Your copy. I've already signed." She opened it slowly, expecting something messy, an accusation, a plea, maybe some final expression of hurt. What she found instead was a 2-page proposal, direct, legally reviewed, emotionally neutral, no margin for revision. It included clean asset division based on premarital holdings and separate trusts, terms for shared property with exit clauses, a confidentiality clause tied to mutual non-defamation, no fights, no mess, no revisionist narratives. She didn't speak for a long time. Her eyes scanned the pages again, then a third time. "This is cold," she said eventually, her voice quieter than I'd expected. I kept my gaze steady. "It's complete." A flicker of something moved across her face, confusion maybe, or the slow realization that the story she'd been scripting no longer belonged to her. She tried to muster a response, but the usual weapons, tears, shock, outrage, had no footing here. She folded the papers, slid them back into the envelope, and placed it on the counter. Then, without looking at me, she asked, "When did you decide this?" I answered truthfully. "The moment I knew you had." She left the kitchen like a set piece being struck. No drama, no sound, just the quiet collapse of a narrative that had lost its protagonist. The first sign her story was failing didn't come from her, it came from silence. Not mine this time, theirs. Her inner circle, the curated gallery of brunch allies and filtered support systems, didn't post the usual affirmations. No vague quotes about finding strength or choosing peace. No softened lighting on solo wine nights. Nothing. It was like they'd seen the draft and decided not to endorse it. The silence said more than support ever could. Meanwhile, I'd made my version public but not performative. No rants, no exposure threads. Just a concise email to our respective families outlining the separation, shared calmly with timestamps on major events and decisions. My language was measured, my documentation clean. I included no blame, no names, just clarity. I knew she'd see it. I also knew she'd hate it, because it gave no one room to wonder. A week later, her attorney withdrew. Official reason: conflict of interest. Unofficially, my legal counsel had reached out to address multiple timeline discrepancies that could not be reconciled with her earlier documentation. Her folders hadn't held up under scrutiny. The paper trail didn't match the public truth. That's when she started texting again, not in anger but in confusion. "Did you tell anyone what I said?" No reply. "You're twisting this. I was hurt." Still nothing. She called once. I let it ring out, because now she was reacting, not directing. The next ripple hit closer. Her closest mutual friend, someone I'd known longer than she had, unfollowed her, quietly. Then sent me a message, not long, just enough to show she'd read between the lines. "I see it now. I'm sorry I didn't sooner." I didn't respond, not because I held a grudge, but because I wasn't handing out credit for late arrivals. Back at the house, she started staging again. The guest room door was always slightly ajar, like a scene waiting to be noticed. She left books with highlighted passages in common areas. Journals half open with neatly printed reflections left visible on the coffee table. Nothing overtly damning, but all emotionally curated. It might have worked months ago. But now the people she'd counted on to witness her performance weren't applauding. They weren't even showing up. Even her therapist friend, the one who once called me hyper-rational in a tone that meant broken, had gone quiet. No likes, no tags, no signal boosts. I wasn't celebrating, I was watching, because the difference between being vilified and being ignored is small but crucial. One tries to control the story. The other realizes no one's reading. She'd expected me to resist, to flail, to shout, but I didn't. And that's what made her version unbelievable, not because I disproved it, but because I refused to act like the man she claimed I was. I wasn't looking for more. I already had enough. But sometimes enough arrives with more than you asked for. The messages weren't hidden, they were just unguarded, left open on her tablet, which she'd connected to our shared calendar months ago and forgotten to delink. I hadn't planned to check it. I was updating a meeting time, that's all, but the banner popped up. His name, Jason, a new one, not someone I recognized from her social media circles, not a colleague she'd mentioned. Just a thread of quiet digital coordination dressed as planning support. She'd written, "I think I'm close. You were right about the narrative. I used the version we talked through, the one with the silence." Then a follow-up, "Can you help me tighten the emotional arc? I want it to land without seeming rehearsed." He replied, "Rework the part where he stopped seeing you. Make that your emotional center. Use phrases like invisible, neglected, and maybe self-erasure. That hits." She didn't fall for this man. She brought him in. Their thread was a collaborative document disguised as vulnerability. She sent voice notes asking how to phrase things in a way that feels human but still indicts him emotionally. She sent screenshots of our texts with captions like, "Is this enough to imply stonewalling?" She wasn't chasing connection. She was curating evidence. I didn't download the thread. I didn't forward it. I photographed a few key exchanges, not to use against her, just to protect the truth, to safeguard against future edits. This wasn't infidelity in the conventional sense. Something colder, less passionate, more precise. She hadn't cheated with him, she'd employed him. Hired someone to help draft a version of events that painted her as a casualty. And what was worse, she wasn't desperate, she was strategic. I stepped back from the tablet and let the screen fade to black. Then I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, hands clasped back straight. Not angry, not even hurt, just still. Because this changed everything. She wasn't spiraling, she wasn't lost. She wasn't misunderstood. She was building a case, and I wasn't in denial anymore. I was on the record. She thought we were still in a dialogue, a marriage under stress, yes, but one still functioning within the bounds of negotiation. She didn't realize I'd already concluded the transaction. The day after I found the messages to Jason, I initiated the financial protections. My attorney and I had already prepared the structures, contingent plans, triggered only if needed. All I had to do was send a name and a date. The name was hers. The date was the day she wrote, "Make it stick emotionally." Within 72 hours, our joint accounts were frozen, flagged as contested under provisional separation grounds. The business license we shared, technically mine with her listed as a secondary signer, was refiled under a dormant LLC I'd registered 3 years earlier. Quietly. No change in function, only ownership. The cabin upstate, the one she once called our future hideout, was revealed to be under an inherited trust she never asked about. She'd assumed it was co-owned. It was. Everything I did was legal, documented, and procedurally clean. There were no surprise account changes, no undisclosed adjustments, just reclassification, just the quiet removal of shared access where access had never been fully mutual to begin with. She came to me 3 days later, brows furrowed, voice low, holding her phone like it was a glitch. "Something's wrong with the account, I can't see the statements." I looked up from my screen. "That's intentional." Her face twitched just slightly. "You closed it." "No, I protected it," she blinked, adjusting to the new vocabulary. "We're still figuring this out," she said carefully. "You're making it look like I've been excluded." "You are," I said with calm precision. "Not because I'm punishing you. Because you've already left. You just didn't tell me until I found your script." She didn't deny it. That surprised me. She stood still for a few seconds, then walked to the window. She stayed there, arms crossed, watching nothing. "This wasn't how I wanted it to go," she said finally, her voice lighter than I expected. "But it's how you planned it," I replied. There was no shout, no accusation, just fact. She turned. "So what now?" I folded my laptop, stood, looked her in the eye. "Now it ends with paperwork, not damage." Her shoulders dropped, not in relief but in recognition. The performance was over. The crew had struck the set. What she hadn't realized was that while she drafted emotional narratives, I built legal structures. She rehearsed a confrontation. I submitted a resolution. And she was no longer part of the decision. It was subtle at first, a shift in the tone of her curated world. Social posts, usually well received, lightly filtered, emotionally vague but resonant, started to land flat. She posted a black and white selfie with a caption about rebirth through discomfort. 3 likes. Another one, a teacup on the windowsill with a quote about silence teaching you who people are. No replies. Then one day, I noticed her therapist friend had unfollowed her. The same one who'd once pulled her aside at a dinner party to tell her she was holding too much for two. I didn't reach out. I didn't need to. It kept happening. A former coworker of hers, someone she'd been close to in that performative wine and book club way, liked one of my posts. Nothing dramatic, just a comment I'd written on a friend's promotion. But it was there. Public. Unremoved. She must have seen it. Because the next morning I caught her scrolling through her own profile, pausing over old photos. Her mouth slightly open, fingers frozen above the screen. Like she couldn't understand why the algorithm had stopped obeying. What she didn't realize was that stories can be edited, but not endlessly. Eventually, people stop reading. Or worse, they start comparing versions. She began sharing less. Not out of shame, I doubt she felt that, but out of strategic confusion. Her narrative wasn't landing. And without an audience, her story had no oxygen. I'd never spoken against her. Never posted anything about what happened. Never tagged, never hinted. All I did was stop shielding her, and without that cover, her version of events pixelated. I heard from one of her old friends, someone neutral. We weren't close, but she reached out quietly. "It's strange. The way she tells it, it doesn't add up, and I've known you long enough to trust how you've handled this." I thanked her, briefly, politely. She said one more thing before she logged off. She always did love the story more than the reality. I didn't respond. Because that was the problem, wasn't it? She built a brand out of curated vulnerability, but reality doesn't trend, and the truth doesn't need hashtags. The last attempt came without ceremony. No makeup, no spin, just her voice through the intercom, flat and unadorned. "I'd like to have one final conversation." I watched her from the upstairs window. She stood by the front gate with her hands in her jacket pockets like a neutral visitor. No storm, no script. I buzzed her in. She didn't step inside. She stood in the threshold, eyes scanning the hall as if expecting some physical echo of what had once been hers, but the air was still. Every photo she might have appeared in was gone, not maliciously removed, just absent, like the chapter had closed and the room had adjusted. "I'm not here to fight," she said. "I know. Her voice caught, but not from emotion, from hesitation. "I think we should at least talk before it's over." "It already is," I said calmly. She nodded once, then looked down. "Can I ask why you didn't respond to any of it?" I met her eyes. "Because every message was written to be read by someone else." She didn't argue, that told me everything. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she said. I needed a way out that didn't make me the bad one." I let the silence stretch. It felt like truth. Then I said, "That's the part that still surprises me. You needed a version where I was the villain more than you needed a version where we were just over." Her lips tightened, not in anger, in recognition. She stepped forward like she might ask to come in, then stopped. "Everyone thinks I lost," she said softly. "No," I replied. "Everyone stopped watching." She blinked, taking that in. There was no call for closure, no last embrace. Just a faint shift in posture, the way a stage actor holds their final beat before lights go out. She turned and walked down the driveway. No bag, no glance back. The door clicked closed behind her like punctuation, and that was it. No finale, no credits, just the end of her version. And the beginning of mine. She'd spent months scripting her exit, layering accusations into soft language, rehearsing wounds she hadn't received. She expected the final chapter to belong to her, to shape it, title it, pass it along in quiet tones and shared glances. But what she didn't understand was that she lost control the moment I stopped reacting. After she left that last day, she reached out once more. An email. No subject line, just a single line of text. "Can we talk privately off record?" I didn't reply, because there was no record anymore, just facts. I forwarded the message to my attorney, marked the date, archived it. She tried again a week later, through someone else this time. A mutual acquaintance reached out and said she was hoping to share her truth in a way that honored both sides. I gave no answer, because the truth doesn't ask for co-authorship. She had already written her story, framed it, rehearsed the language. She'd worked with someone to sculpt it into a version she thought would be accepted. She planned it down to the emotional beats, the timing of her tears, the carefully planted phrases she thought would pass for raw honesty. But in the end, no one reposted it. And I didn't rebut it, I didn't have to, because the power she tried to seize required participation, and I gave her nothing. Not rage, not agreement, not even closure. The control she thought she held was conditional on me reacting, defending, correcting. But I didn't. And that was the ending she never prepared for. She wrote the narrative. I closed the curtain.